it comes to remaking Resident Evil 4, just what do you change about a game as iconic as this, and by how much? It's a decision-making process that's hard to envy, having a precious jewel in your hand and having to cut it just right so that it shines anew. Thankfully, Capcom have knocked it out of the park, and Resident Evil 4 Remake just might be the best of the bunch. It's not perfect, however. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and this is Resident Evil 4, 6 changes we love and 2 we hate. Number 6, the atmosphere is perfectly balanced. Resident Evil 4 was a massive departure for the franchise back in 2005 in almost every way. Its total gameplay refit from its predecessors allowed RE4 to blast its way into the mainstream with the appeal of being an approachable action game. As such, it's fair to say the horror suffered. Now, it wasn't totally absent by any means, whether it was hordes of Ganado bearing down on you or the unstoppable march of the horrific Regenerador enemies. RE4 has its moments of knuckle-whitening tenseness. However, it was first and foremost an action game where guns and ammunition were plentiful, enemies were fun to shoot, and Leon QTE'd his way out of boulder runs and stomping stone men. What's remarkable about the remake is that it manages to heighten the scares once more without the action suffering at all. This is not Resident Evil 2 Remake scary, and it absolutely shouldn't have been, but RE4R uses darkness to great efficiency, and there are moments, whether it's exploring somewhere new or even retreading old ground, where you'll be on high alert for what could leap out of the shadows. Furthermore, Leon's roster of enemies are just more frightening to look at thanks to the visual and audio fidelity. The body horror elements in the original are turned way up. Ganados charge at you unabated by their broken necks, and Plagas latch onto their foes as they scream and struggle. And so, all the same, it's just as fun, or perhaps more so, when you pull off a stunning feat of action heroics to survive a horde of scythe-wielding maniacs. Number 5. Puzzles are an understated highlight. The other trade-off from Resi ditching its fixed camera routes for the satisfaction of monster-mashing fun was a reduced inclusion of puzzles. Again, like the scares, there were a couple of moments in the original RE4 where players had to press some specific buttons or slide a few panels, but otherwise the focus was elsewhere. The remake very cautiously corrects this by including some really lovely segments that require you to sling your rifle for a second and take a better look at your surroundings. They don't break the mold of what to expect from the series, putting items in the correct alignment or finding the solution to a button combination, but they're a welcome addition. Especially when arriving at the spooky European castle, it just feels at home. What's Resident Evil without a big creepy abode with a selection of weird brain teasers? Best of all, the puzzles add to the tapestry without bogging things down. They add a missing special sauce to the proceedings that provoke an exciting emotion of, oh, this is what was missing all that time. They're hardly complicated enough to wind up in a Professor Layton game, but they add some value to the slower, more explorative moments of Resident Evil 4 between salvos of gunfire. Number 4. The monsters finally have meaning. For many, RE4 is just about blasting the uglies with your weapon of choice and moving on, and in all fairness, it certainly feels like that's the intention that Capcom was going for the original game. RE4 Classic carries a certain kind of momentum that beckons players to always be moving forward. This does come at the detriment of some story elements for long-term players, and this is one thing that the remake at least attempts to fix. For example, dedicated Resident Evil lore nerds can expertly describe the pseudoscience that led to certain monsters in the franchise. Whether it was in the files in the games themselves or additional world-building material, monsters like the Hunters and Lickers have explanations for how they came into being. With RE4, there's no real reason why the likes of the Garrador and the Verdugo were so special. The remake at least tries to correct this by telling us specifically who they were before they were put through horrific Plagas-centric experiments. Knowing that you're about to face off with the castle's torture specialist who went a little too far just adds to the unease. There's also at least a touch of explanation on why they changed so drastically compared to the common villager. Beyond that too, there are files that detail the sad backstory of Ramon Salazar and his relationship with Lord Sadler that, if he wasn't trying to kill you, would almost make him sympathetic. Number 3. Remixed rooms. The remake of Resident Evil 2 felt like a big change because, of course, it was totally transforming its gameplay. What it did incredibly well, however, was to remain faithful to the heart of the game's major location, the Raccoon City Police Department, whilst also changing enough to make it feel brand new. Resident Evil 4 Remake has a ton of iconic locations throughout its runtime that are somehow essentially directly recreated from the original and remixed all at the same time. Good examples are the catapult-filled castle walls and the infamous water room. Both now have expanded lower levels that players must explore and then come back up from. More so, the village that seemed so perfectly reconstructed in the demo becomes affected by destruction as you continue to run through it. Areas that are less memorable are more free to try new things, but are wonderfully punctuated with cool reimaginings of classic set pieces. Not every room in the game has made it, and some that already push the boundaries of RE4's originally more goofy tone are gone from the more realistic remake. The gigantic Salazar Colossus that chases Leon, as well as the underground chamber filled with lava that defies physics, are missing. Instead, they are both lovingly paid tribute to in the Clock Tower, which features a stationary fire-breathing Salazar statuette. By riding this line, RE4 always has an air of familiarity bubbling underneath the surface that bursts out like a plagus through a Ganado's neck when you open the doors to a room that you immediately recognise. Number 2. Quality of life improvements. Having played enough Resi 4 myself, watched friends blast through it, and seen a few YouTube Let's Plays, I can safely say that there is a very popular way to approach combat. Shoot a Ganado, melee them to the ground, and then go hog wild with your knife until they perish. It's a brilliant way to save ammo, and it makes RE4's knife probably the most useful in the series. Not only is this made a part of Remake's gameplay loop by having it be a prompt for downed enemies, Capcom have taken careful care to make the knife into something that can feel like the centre point of your armoury. With it now degrading at different rates, whether you successfully parry or have to plunge it into a parasitic-ridden goon, there's a real push and pull with its functionality. Like firearms, your main knives can also be upgraded in the durability department, and it feels prudent to do this as soon as possible considering how useful they are. Also, sometimes the best improvements are ones that just come naturally. Whilst the original RE4 is still a joy, going into your inventory every time you need to change weapon really dates the game. Obviously, that's no longer an issue here, which makes RE4R feel very fluid. Still, the remake is a beefy experience like its predecessor, and it beckons for a long, thorough playthrough or two. The merchant's requests mean cute little hunts to sidetrack yourself with, be it for souped up enemies or smashing blue medallions. Also, hunting treasure just adds more value to the experience, considering you can inlay any gems you'd like how you see fit to shoot for maximum payout. Number 1. Luis Serra steals the show. Resident Evil fans can probably coin a new term at this point, and I'd like to put it into the ether now. Luis Serra has had the Carlos treatment. For those who skipped out on Resident Evil 3 Remake, one of its biggest strengths was its characterization. It did the cast of the original 99 game so well, and its proudest achievement was its transformation of Carlos Oliveira. Once a Spanish stereotype of a ladies' man and not much else, the remake turned him into a lovable hunk with a winning personality. Coincidentally, Luis fits the same mould in the original RE4, and whilst his performance was fantastic, his character felt ultimately lacking. Now, whilst he's still a confessed ladies' man, we get a lot more from him. His increased screen time allows him greater growth, he has an excellent back and forth with Leon, and an important touching arc. Seeing Luis interact with Ada makes his story of being involved with the rival company, as well as Sadler's own laboratories, a lot clearer. There's even a small but important change in his backstory. Now, as a former Umbrella researcher, it ties him just slightly tighter to the other games in the series. There's a lot to love with Resident Evil 4 Remake, and so much of it is so overwhelmingly good that you're certain to come out of it ready to dive right back in. However, there are a few caveats that are downright strange and outright bad. Number 2. RNG Nonsense. Returning from the original, and with a brilliant brand new pirate skin in fact, is the Merchant's Shooting Gallery. Instead of unlocking little figurines, players are awarded with gold and silver coins. These can be put into a gumball machine for a random charm that attaches to your attaché case. These charms are cute little buffs that include the possibility of crafting additional ammo and certain shop discounts. The problem is that these are given to you completely at random. The precious few coins you can get via the Shooting Gallery might prove to be totally useless if you get something you don't need, or even a double. Further coins are harder to come by as they are traded for spinels, one of the game's most valuable commodities. To make things even worse, they're not even really that random. You can deposit 3 gold coins just to receive another common charm, reload your save and do it again, and be given the same result over and over. It happened to me, and it might happen to you too. At first, what feels like a cool addition just falls ultimately incredibly flat when you run out of coins and have nothing of value to show for it. Number 1. Wasted story potential. Louis Serra's characterization is in keeping with the top form Resident Evil has been on with its colourful cast of heroes and villains in the last half-decade, but RE4 Remake is a significant stopping point of that momentum. For example, after 6 years of presuming she's dead, Leon finally reunites with his mysterious former love interest Ada Wong with about as much emotional resonance as realising someone's done the washing up for you. This is true to the original game, which was actually a criticism of the 2005 title that the remake could have fixed. Overall, Ada's presence in the story feels muted, and the same can be said for the game's villains. Salazar's war of one-liners with Leon is missing, which makes sense for the tonal shift, but nothing replaces it. He comes and goes, as does Big Bad Osmond Sadler, with relatively little fanfare. Jack Krauser gets the worst of it. In RE4 Classic, Krauser enters the fray late into the proceedings as a figure from Leon's past. It wasn't until the Dark Side Chronicles, an on-rail shooter for the Wii, that we ever got to see the history of the two as part of Operation Javier. Excitingly, Krauser mentions these events by name, and then the game totally contradicts them. What is seen in Dark Side Chronicles as a two-man operation is erroneously described as a large job with lots of dead squad mates that sent Krauser on a warpath. The biggest flaw for the original Resident Evil 4 for the RE superfan was how disconnected it was to all the other stories around it. As such, Capcom spent a lot of time trying to make connections to fix this. The remake could have been an incredible opportunity to finally retroactively do so, and instead it complicates matters even further. And that's it. Let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. How do you feel about Resident Evil 4 Remake so far? I personally love it, despite a few issues. Let me know what your high points are and what your low points are. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.